All right, hello everybody, and welcome to another Green Square Talks Battlebots podcast. Another episode review here, and the second half of the first round of the bracket. So, yeah, I'm here with Derin and Captain Mantine, per usual co-hosts, and then guest starring on this podcast, we have Derek from Robotic Death Company, Gigabyte, and Cobalt. So, how's it going, all three of you?
That's going great.
I'm doing pretty good, man. Hope you are.
It's overall going pretty well for me past few weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah, heck yeah. We got a pretty good list of fights here, and many of my favorites advance to the next round. Several good fights and a lot to discuss in this thing. So plan will be go through each of these fights one by one, discuss the battle, and we'll also talk about the Road to the Giant Nut thing, upcoming matchups, and more. So yeah, before we get started and start talking about Black Dragon and Ripperoni, just warning you, there will be spoilers as usual. So if you haven't seen the fights yet and don't want to know the fight results yet, I'd recommend checking out those fights before coming back here and listening to this discussion. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started talking about Black Dragon and Ripperoni. Okay, so fight number one here. We got to see the bottom of the fourth quadrant right there. The 12-seeded Ripperoni taking on Black Dragon. Battle between Bert on Bert battle. And yeah, I think a lot of this was just going to be driving and who can get those early exchanges in. And this fight did not go well. It went how I expected it to, but did not have the result I was expecting to see, at least in this one. Because I had Ripperoni taking the dub for this one because I thought Ripperoni would win lots of those early exchanges, and wasn't sure how Black Dragon would be able to handle it. But Black Dragon sure proved me wrong on that second half of it right there. And yeah, so some of y'all want to talk about this match, share your thoughts on it.
Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
You can go first.
So, like we'd seen kind of Ripperoni, do really well this season. So I was still interested in seeing what would happen in this matchup because, yeah, Black Dragon's a really tough robot, but Ripperoni's been doing excellently. But I also thought that Black Dragon actually had the possibility of having the ground game advantage on them because A, those forks actually are pretty decent, and B, they had borrowed, if I remember correctly, starting this fight, they had borrowed a bunch of springs from us to actually properly spring load their forks. And I think if you watch the fight a few times, you could see they actually get under the feeder a few times. I did expect that Black Dragon's weapon would go down because it just happens to do so, usually around like the minute and a half mark. I kind of joke because I judge Norwalk that a Brazil bot can't last more than 2 minutes because that's actually their standard match format. And I've been pretty correct in that bet, at least when it comes to the small bots. But Black Dragon managed to outlast Ripperoni, and we didn't expect the drive failure. It being on the shelf was very entertaining because I don't like the shelf at all. And I hope at least, it pushes more people to say that the shelf should go away.
It's an absolute fair assumption. Derin, you want to talk about it since like you're ready and have something you're itching to say?
Not really. Ripperoni had this fight until it didn't. And I think that's the best analysis I suppose I can give of this fight. Because dang, they were getting all the shots. They were hunting Black Dragon across the box. They were on top. And then just everything started breaking. And then it ends them being on the shelf and unable to move in any meaningful way, and then they get counted out with like 3 seconds left. They probably would have lost the judge's decision at that point, considering they had just basically been mostly dead beforehand. But dang, that just first like the flywheel went down, which didn't help matters, and then the drive just sort of just crapped out near the end, which dang, that just hurts a lot because I had them winning this fight going pretty far actually. So well, so yeah.
Something to notice, I do think the flywheel crapping out actually helped them for a bit because when you're crab walking, you don't want to counter gyro. You want to be able to use your weapon's gyro.
That is fair. Mantine, you want to talk about the match? What your thoughts were on it?
Oh yeah, man. It was a good fight. I was thinking that Black Dragon actually might have an easier time just considering how big and awkward Ripperoni is. I wasn't sure if it would actually be able to get good purchase anywhere on the Black Dragon, but it did very well. I was really impressed with how durable both robots were, and it's sad to see Ripperoni go out. I think it's definitely a shoe-in for Rookie of the Year, though. It's been very impressive, and I think it'll do pretty well in Champions. And Black Dragon doing what it does best. It's unkillable brick, and definitely lived up to that today, or that day. And yeah, it was a good fight. I hate to see Ripperoni go out. It was one of my favorites this season, but hopefully we'll see some good stuff from them in Champions, and hopefully Black Dragon will keep on marching.
100%. Yeah, this was just a driving clinic from honestly both teams here, because I felt both of them drove this match really well. Ripperoni did a good job of putting their disc right into Black Dragon as many times as they could, while Black Dragon just continued to stay aggressive and get some incredible control moments throughout the match. But yeah, I think it was summed up pretty well from these three gentlemen. Black Dragon just simply outlasted Ripperoni, just showing that despite that quick KO and that Riptide fight, like that thing is still just so hard to knock out. And yeah, eventually we started seeing damage stack up on Ripperoni a little bit. They lost a flywheel probably midway through the fight, but we're still able to land some great shots despite losing the flywheel there. And it sounded like from what Anna said at the after show thing that a bunch of connections came loose was kind of what was going on with Ripperoni there, which I'm betting is probably what killed most of their drive, but along with the fact that they got stuck on the upper deck basically, and I don't think there's really
Yeah,
too much to it.
I don't think the show illustrates like how like easy it is to lose at BattleBots, and how there's just so many little details which if you simply overlook, like even slightly, like you forget to zip tie one connection or whatever, that could just kill your match.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hey Blaze, you want to talk about Black Dragon Ripperoni?
No, I do not.
Why not?
That's fair.
This fight makes me sad.
Yeah, I also had Ripperoni going far in this bracket. I had Ripperoni making it to the top 8 before losing to Hydra. But yeah, it's sad to see Ripperoni got in the first round doing so well. But definitely was still an incredible run, because victories over Endgame and Copperhead are no easy feat, even if they might have been driving issues. But still credit Ripperoni. They were both rock solid victories regardless. So yeah, I'm also looking forward to seeing what they can do in Champions, assuming Ripperoni's going to be there. And yeah, should we move on to the next match then?
Yep.
Sure.
All right, next one, and this one, like the probably the most important one of this podcast, and definitely probably a favorite matchup of the episode for, I would guess, quite a few of us. But got a battle between two massive vertical spinners here, and Monsoon and Cobalt. And this one, it definitely went about how I expected it to, but not the outcome I was expecting exactly once again. But it was a great fight regardless. We got to see many explosive hits. And yeah, Derek, you want to give us a reasonable summary of the match?
So looking at the matchup, I was actually fairly confident we could beat Monsoon, but I obviously work on Gigabyte, but I helped John with the ground game. And I personally think that the setup we should have run and what I asked for was the piano keys, because essentially Monsoon can run forks as long as they want, but I knew those piano keys would immediately get under them. And while their spinner may stick down below the forks, unless it is physically hitting the floor, it cannot hit our piano keys. That, and if they take out one or two, it doesn't matter. So Sam and Dave ended up picking, along with John, the configuration we had run against our last few opponents because a few factors. The main one being that Dave wanted like full driving control. He didn't like that he'd get hung up on seams occasionally with the piano keys. And I don't think he knew that Monsoon had that longer fork setup because we hadn't seen it before. I suspected that they had it, but we hadn't seen it before. So as soon as I saw they went with that setup, I was fairly worried, especially when I saw our setup. During the course of the match, if you actually watch, when we go fork to fork with the little side forklets there, which essentially compose of our piano keys, like it's just single ones of our piano key setup, we actually just slide right under them. That's why we win the opening few engagements. But when the mountings fail for a few different reasons, and then we're just stuck with the long forks, you could see that we're basically tying, but occasionally Monsoon's winning the engagement. Because essentially, like by the end, you could see Dave's trying to like misalign with Monsoon to where we'd hit the drive pod instead of going straight in. But of course, you know, Tim's a good driver and all that. And he could kind of get there, but not quite enough. And by the end, we ended up stopping because the weapon had desoldered from drawing so much current from all the self-rights.
Out of curiosity, is that what happened that prevented Cobalt from self-running the Minotaur fight as well?
No, so with Minotaur, our motor is a brush motor, right? So we have the armature that spins, and then we have the brushes that actually give it power. What happened was because it was that particular LEM, which is our motor, was an older motor, those brushes were so worn out that half of them weren't contacting for most of the fight. That's why randomly during the fight you could see a spin down and then spin back up, because the brushes are having intermittent contact, so they're not actually giving the motor full power. Honestly, like probably partially through that we were on half power, and then eventually we just had nothing.
Gotcha.
But this one was just we drew so much current that we desoldered. So basically, wattage is the measurement of electrical energy, right? So for a set wattage, you can have a certain amount of voltage, a certain amount of current, and you can play with those values. And the higher your voltage is, the less current you draw. And the more current you draw, the more heat you produce. Cobalt is on half the voltage of Gigabyte, which means it's drawing twice the current, which means it's drawing twice the heat. And those self-rights take up a lot of current, especially during the Monsoon fight, when we self-right, we bounced a couple of times.
Gotcha.
So that's another one of the changes we're doing. Both robots are going to 16S, so about 60 volts voltage, which is the max. Oh, here's a chunk from the bottom of Cobalt that we fixed after. This is the bottom plate. We had to cut this out because you can see it's pretty bent here from this hits.
Ooh. Heck yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a pretty rock solid summary of that, and definitely good explanation of the kind of damage that Cobalt took in that one and what was going on in that match. Derin, Mantine, or Blaze, you guys want to talk about the match? What your thoughts were on it?
I guess I'll go first. I had Cobalt going all the way to the championship fight and being the giant net holder. I had him going. I had like no what's the term? No obligations, no regret. I had full confidence they were just going to get through everyone else. Like just I saw the path. I saw you eventually getting a rematch of Minotaur and winning that rematch because you nearly had like the first time, which would have been awesome. And then I eventually had you facing Ripperoni because I thought they'd go far. And then facing Huge in the final, and you'd probably be at that point it was kind of a coin toss, but I said screw it, let's go Cobalt because it might reach the chassis or something, and I don't know. So I was really gutted when I saw how this fight ended. I was like, oh man, there goes my pick for champion. So darn. But it was a good fight. I mean, there's some back and forth. I think Monsoon's pivoty design kind of helped it in this fight in ways I didn't really foresee, like keeping the chassis sort of out of the way of the weapon and like preventing it from getting too many big hits. I don't know like what damage Monsoon took, or like
There were
how
some
much
hits
I
on the
had.
armor.
Okay. Uh. So yeah, good fight. Sad the way it ended, but pretty good fight. Hope to see Cobalt absolutely destroyed in Champions if that's still a thing that's happening because yeah, I expect Colt to hopefully get to the finals of the whatever champion brackets it's in if it's in one. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, like if you were to take on Huge, what would Cobalt's strategy be for that one? If you know.
I actually have pretty good friends with Jonathan Schultz, so I know the wheel clearance on Huge. So I think the really memey route would be to just get a lot of ground clearance by like mounting all the drive electronics on the bottom, like literally just having the drive outside of the robot. I honestly think that could work. I think going weapon to weapon is not a bad idea.
Yes, I had a feeling it was either going to be you'd use like the same spinner you use here and go weapon on weapon, or maybe go with the spinner you use against lots of the robots you'd intend to try to cut into, like the non-spinners, try to cut apart the wheels or something.
I think cutting apart the wheels with that blade wouldn't work. Because in order for you to actually do damage to those wheels, you need like a huge amount of reach and a huge amount of bite. I don't think just having like something that resembles a saw blade will actually work on Huge.
Oh yeah, that's fair. Mantine, you want to talk about the match?
Yeah, I going into the fight, I was very confident in Cobalt winning this fight. I was surprised that they didn't go with the piano keys because I was kind of looking at it. I sort of assumed that they would, just because having those long, narrow keys that Monsoon could sort of catch the side of when Cobalt is so reliant on getting things up that wedge and getting it onto the weapon. I was surprised when they took those long, very flankable forks. But either way, I mean, Cobalt, it started how I thought it would go. Cobalt absolutely launching Monsoon in the air. Monsoon was a lot more resilient than I initially expected. And I mean, it was just a case of Cobalt just got it not exactly outdriven, just but I think they kind of came into the fight with the wrong config, as Derek said. They're I don't know. I was hoping to see Cobalt go a little further than it did, but again, hopefully they'll do well in Champions. And I'm curious to see what design changes they make in the future. What kind of changes they make to the robot to help with its somewhat prevalent self-righting issues that it's had in the past couple seasons. But we'll see.
Absolutely. Like I will admit that self-riding definitely looked a lot better like this in last season than it did in 2019. So
Yeah.
at least like it's definitely better than it has been in the past. So
No, it's definitely gotten better, and I mean, it's proven that it can self-right. It's just that
yep.
how many self-rights does it have before it breaks again? And I feel like that's always the question, sort of, when Cobalt goes in the fights with robots that can actually withstand the spinner. It's how long can Cobalt last before it eventually kind of gets stuck on its head from having to strain itself.
Oh yeah.
So the way we see the whole self-righting thing is it's more of a question of weapon reliability
Hmm.
in our ground game than it is a question of whether we can self-right.
Yeah.
Because if you just always get under your opponent, you just never have to self-right.
True.
Or if the weapon doesn't stop, it keeps working. So that's why we're moving to a higher voltage.
Okay.
And we're also probably going to put self-righting ears on because essentially when you're trying to self-right with a weapon like that, obviously you want to hit the floor, you want to bite into it, but you don't want to get like 2 inches of bite into the floor. That's why we did like a front flip then a back flip.
Yeah.
You want to get, let's say, like ½ inch, an inch of bite, and the ears prevent you from biting further than that. So you have a more consistent self-right. It's more like a pop instead of like a launch.
Yeah. Okay.
In theory, it also allows us, and I think we can with the amount of motor power we have, to self-right from a stop if we're sitting on the ears.
Okay.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
We've had zero discussion, like maybe 2 seconds of discussion about a dedicated self-righting mechanism. I personally think it's just a crappy idea because it's just a huge amount of weight and volume, neither of which I think are useful for us to spend on a self-riding mechanism.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Blaze, you want to talk about the match? If you're there.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I guess I'll talk about the match then. Good driving clinic between Tom and Dave once again, like the last match. Yeah, I kind of gotta agree with Derek's point basically on why Derek thinks that Cobalt should have gone with the piano keys there, because the logic behind that makes sense. I see why Dave might have been against that idea, just because Dave did talk about after the interview, after the overhaul fight, that how he wasn't exactly a fan of getting hung up on the floor or having issues with the floor. But yeah, started out strong for Cobalt, but then eventually Cobalt got deforked, and that's when things really started to go in Monsoon's favor, showing that Monsoon is just continues to be like an absolute beast of a robot, which is, while this may have been like an upset, like seating wise, I wouldn't consider this an upset one bit, just because Monsoon is, like I said, a beast of a robot, a monster weapon, and definitely well known for causing like huge amounts of chaos. And not to mention that weapon hasn't stopped ever since that accidental that happened in the Black Dragon fight, and which is incredible to see, and it'll be incredible to see what Monsoon can do, at least going to the next round when it fights Sawblaze. And yeah, sad that Cobalt went out in the first round. And unfortunately, like Mantine said, because I also had Cobalt going far. I had them reaching the top 8 as well. But yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get to see Cobalt in Champions, and yeah. So yeah, before we move on to the next matchup, you want to summarize like Gigabyte season, kind of, Derek? Might as well talk a little bit about that too.
Oh yeah, so Gigabyte season was, fairly problematic. Mainly because we had done a full rebuild switching to the new brushless drive system, but we didn't have really the time or the resources necessary to finish it before we got there. Because essentially it was just me and a teammate working out of like a quarter of the garage to get the build done. And Gigabyte had not had actually like a formal inventory system created until actually just a few months ago, like after the season. So it was a lot of waiting on parts because we were like, oh, these exist. Wait, they don't. And then a lot of just trying to build the robot, which also had huge amount of design issues, which we resolved now. Our first match against free shipping. We knew free shipping was fairly beatable, but the biggest question was whether or not the robot would be ready, because we ended up passing safety like the morning before that fight because we were so crunched on time and we had a lot of setbacks, namely a number of important fasteners getting broken. And we ended up losing that fight because we ended up cutting our own power wires, which made our frame live, which then shorted to the motor and shorted that on. Because I think had that not happened, the mask we had run was a little bit sus. Though it was the only one we had available at the time, again, because of the whole like not keeping track of spares thing. I think it would not have broken because when free shipping slams into us, I'm fairly sure we short on practically midair and just slam the mask into the ground, which is what snaps it off. For Bloodsport, we were a bit more prepared. Actually, I think we were actually ready for this one. But our failure in this fight was actually, yeah. So this is our new drive rail, same construction. So if you see, we have these bolt holes here for the battery box. Now we have, at this case, 5, but during free shipping, we only run 4 because we historically have only run 4. And before Bloodsport, because I was concerned about the battery box falling out, I had told us to double up the covers that hold the batteries in here. And what that did was that reduced the thread engagement into what is, in this case, magnesium. Magnesium's very soft. So when we had that huge weapon-to-weapon hit, that plate, which was literally just like literally like 200 gram, like maybe 400 grams aluminum plate, and just the wiring it was holding in, just shot out, blowing out all of the threads, and then that cover was caught by the shell and went around and disconnected our left side VESC, which also powers the receiver for both that VESC and the weapon.
Okay.
Hmm.
That
And then we
makes
just
sense.
stopped after that because we only had like one sided drive. There's no point in that. For Star Child, we actually were more, again, slowly creeping into the more ready status, but we were still kind of behind. We didn't really have, kind of mostly had 2 frames ready by the end, but during the middle, we basically only had 1 frame ready. And we had to run our config we had done for Huge, which we'd never tested before. In fact, like you could see those wings on the top of the shell. We had to weld those on the morning of. We had the config, we just hadn't had quite it prepped yet because it was a matchup that happened in this case 3 years ago. But we were more confident in the robot because we had figured out those issues. Like for example, for the battery box, we ended up using like all 10 bolts or something ridiculous like that. So we're probably going to go down to 6 because we have a better system for it now. Yeah, fixed a lot of other gremlins. And that fight ended up going really well for us. It proved that the configuration worked. And you'd see I have a few pieces here like this. This is one of those like propeller arms here. You can see it's where it's snapped off. You'd see it essentially gives us something like functionally like a 46 or something inch blade. They end up snapping off because if you think about it, so the plate goes like this because it kind of matches the shell circle. The weld stopped about here-ish, and when you're welding, it kind of heats up and then softens the area next to the weld. And this essentially made it to where instead of us having this much material holding the plate in, it was more like this with nice soft spots here to essentially like allow the stress to travel and then shear along this entire plate here. But because we are a shell, we have a lot of mass, especially with the big like bottom ring and so on. Even with 1 blade off, we were still balanced enough to drive. It wasn't fun because the robot was shaking, but we could still spin at a fair speed. And then eventually the second blade snapped off. But by then, we have lower blades, which were still working okay. But by then, the wheels were toast. And it was clearly just over for them.
Yeah, it's amazing how well those worked out for you guys in that
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah, so this is the Star Child wheel path. They have like a massive wheel, I think like 42 inch or something like that. And they end up cutting it off here and here for us. You can see like this whole quadrant from here to here is completely sheared off. So on. If you look, it's composed of this wheel is essentially held together with hundreds of rivets, and most of them were pulled out. You can see all the holes along here, but none of the rivets. And also, yeah, these wheels aren't cheap. If you could see, these aren't even like a 2D like water jet part. They pocketed these out for extra weight. It's probably like $6 grand in wheels or something that was lost in that fight. So yeah, that was good for us.
I wonder if that's the same exact Tigris that Horizon borrowed for the Shatter fight. At least for their top armor, which I actually own right on the shelf
I
back
think
there.
so. There were a few different Tigris sources this year.
I
There's
know
a lot
I know
from-
they got either I want to say they got it from Huge, but I don't fully remember if it was from them or from Star Child, but
Yeah, so a few different teams sourced Tigris this year. We actually sourced a couple of sheets of Tigris for a few configurations. Huge obviously had their Tigris stash, so they were the first one to use it, though they did buy some for other people. And Ricky Willems also sourced some Tigris. Depending on the supplier, it was kind of varying levels of quality when it came to just whether or not it would delaminate. I know some people had some issues to where one of the suppliers, like you get in a big sheet, right? The outer 10% of that sheet wasn't really laminated. So they're having issues with their edges fraying, so they had to fix that. Yeah, so for Endgame, we had Endgame pretty tough fight for us. Honestly, I think I would have preferred any other matchup at that point because any other match was probably more likely for us to go 2-2. So we just kind of pulled out all the stops. So we put the flat shell back on. During the time between free shipping and endgame, we had tried something I wanted to try, which was fit a Tegris band around the flat part of the shell. Because I realized they were just striking the flat part and just going through it because it's just titanium. And I still think if it was AR, they would have just gone straight through it anyway. So I tried that, which mostly worked. You could see, I post pictures on Reddit. If you see like places where they struck the Tigris first and then the shell, a lot of energy was absorbed, substantially less damage. Our main failures were the spatula designed for that year was just way too flimsy. It literally died just pushing into the kill saw slot, which is just like a piece of polycarb. And the mass which we had to run because we didn't have weight was that 90-degree mass. I really don't like the design, and we retired it after this year, but we didn't have the weight for any other mass, and also running the spatula and like a kind of magnet setup we tried didn't really work. So that was it for us. We also did an interesting change, which we're carrying over to where Gigabyte had traditionally run on 6 batteries, where you had 4 for the weapon and then 2 for the drive, because while everything was brushed, the weapon was running on 14S, so about 52 volts, while the drive, being mag motors, was just on like 7S. So we ended up, because we're now on the brushless system that can do 14S, we were on a unified battery bank anyways, and we realized, oh, we're running way too much battery if we're running 6 batteries. So we pared it down to 4, which got us just enough weight to run everything you kind of wanted. Didn't make a difference, but we're definitely keeping that setup now. I actually have some of the new batteries because we're switching to 16S. So I don't think anybody shows this, but here's a scale factor of like a heavyweight battery. So this is one of our batteries. Let's see, it's mirrored for you guys, but it says 8S, 1P, so 8 in series, 1 parallel, 6,500 milliamp hours. So you can see this is a very big battery, and we're running 4 of these. So we're running about 13,000 milliamp hours. Most teams, I'd say, are in the 10,000 to 9,000-ish range for like verts. Obviously a lot less for control bots, so on. So yeah, we're now running 4 of those on 16S instead of 4 of the older batteries on 14S. And those are custom packs for a new Cobalt sponsor, SMC Racing.
Ooh. Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, nice.
Anything else?
I know I have a few, and then I know Mantine might have a few as well. Yeah, will we see Cobalt and Gigabyte again in the future in like champions or exhibition matches, if you're allowed to reveal?
Yes, you'll see those robots in the future. I'm not quite sure the NDA status, so I'm not going to say for which.
That's fair. And then I'm guessing based on what you're talking about, there are plans to apply with Cobalt and Gigabyte for next season.
Yeah, the application's already in for both.
Beautiful. Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then next one. Are there any updates on Brent Riker?
Yeah, Brent's fine. Like, he's doing well. We'll probably see him next year. He's
Heck
doing some
yeah.
parts for us, in fact, right now.
That's awesome news to
Good.
hear.
Yeah, that's good, man.
Geez, I had one more in mind, but I forgot it. So if it's a Mantine or Derin.
Nancy can go first.
All right, yeah. So I know that it's been said, and of course, just physics speaking, Gigabyte's spin up torque is a very tough thing to counter. Its drive has been very wonky this season, and I just want to know, is there any way that you guys can or do you guys have any plans for adding anything to counter that initial startup torque anymore, or is that just kind of something that you have to deal with?
So our plans are, we have a magnet setup
Hmm.
that is slated to go in this year. We're still figuring out the last of the details. But
Okay.
yes, we're gonna run magnets. We're looking at making them adjustable, or they will be adjustable. So we have a range of, let's say, like 80 to like 150 pounds of downforce.
Okay.
And that's
Hmm.
the main way we're gonna try and mitigate the torque steer. I'm
Hmm.
also looking into developing a custom board of essentially to take it's just like an accelerometer and a processor to essentially kind of work as a gyro to detect what little torque steer is left after the magnet. Hopefully I won't need to do this, but would be nice. And just
I think you accidentally muted yourself or something.
yeah,
Oh, there we go. Now you're back.
give me a moment.
Right.
So yeah, so like essentially it would work like, I honestly may run a helicopter gyro instead, but like that gyro in the sense that it would detect some amount of turn with respect to what the actual input is from the sticks, and then bed that out to drive in a straight line.
Hmm.
Honestly, even if we don't necessarily need that function with the magnets, because the torque steer thing is a traction issue essentially, that we will we may implement it anyways, because having something you can essentially take your inputs from your receiver and do things with them is actually really useful.
Hmm.
So like if you so what that allows is, for example, Endgame was like one of the first people to do this, is it allows them to have like 2 receivers for every speed controller, because that processor can now take inputs from 2 different receivers, detect if one fails, and just take from one.
Okay.
And also their weapon system, there are speed controllers where if they overcurrent, which happens a lot when you're hitting people, it'll reset. So because they have that processor in line with everything, it'll automatically go, oh, it's resetting. Let me do the necessary throttle commands to automatically reset, so you don't have to worry about that.
Oh,
Like, there's a lot of cool things like that you can do.
yeah. All right. I gotcha.
So, you said you're retiring the mast design. That's good. How are you gonna like how are you gonna like test the new design? Are you gonna like make a simulation of
For
mast
what?
designs for Gigabyte for self-writing?
So, I mean, when we were retiring that mass design, we specifically mean that 90-degree like machine mass thing that we ran.
Mhm.
We're just gonna switch to like the proven mass system of just the bent pole and the machine bit.
Okay.
It's basically like that bend is a big stress concentration, but if it's just a single piece of steel tube, it's really strong, like very strong. So
Okay.
yeah, we're just gonna go with that, and we're beefing up we'll call it the mass cap, which is essentially what connects the mass to the rest of the robot. That machine bit at the bottom, we're beefing that up a little bit.
All right. I thought you were gonna go like the blood sport route and use that weird spiral thing to
So
minimize torque.
the spiral, they do it because they don't have the same amount of torque that Gigabyte does. So when we were looking at changes for next season, one of the things we were looking at was changing the ratios to spin a bit faster. We ended up realizing that wasn't necessary with the new voltage, but like we could literally probably go to almost like 1-to-1 shell to motor, but we just have enough torque to self-write. So you think about it, the spiral requires less torque to self-write, sure, but it's a longer pipe, it's more weight. And if you don't need that kind of more gentle self-writing, why waste the weight there?
Mhm. Gotcha.
Those are all the questions then.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
so.
I might as well then ask this proving grounds. Basically here there's gonna be a matchup against Gigabyte thing. There any info you want to share about that one?
Yeah, so because one of our big issues was just getting ready for this season, I decided, okay, we're gonna build it really early, like nothing's even been announced yet for season 8, and go to proving grounds to do a lot of testing. Yeah, like I personally have like zero concerns about getting in for next year because it's Gigabyte, but I just do want to make sure everything's dialed and tested because like not only do you get to do fights there, if you just go in early, they'll let you just drive around the arena, which is huge because then we could really bed in the magnet setup, do a lot of testing to see like, okay, with the new magnets, how much spin up can we do and not steer, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll also be a good opportunity for lots of the others, possible newcomers to get a chance and to testing out their robots and everything and seeing if they can possibly get into the top 50. And yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not sure how many new robots will be taking on Gigabyte at that thing, but it should be exciting regardless.
yeah, we have 3 robots slated, that being Jackpot, Doom, and just very recently Slammo is now going to try and make it. But we could use another robot if anybody's interested. Honestly, might be down to fight 2 because there are multiple showing dates. But yeah, we'll be there July 5th through 9th.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and then might as well ask this since Civilian Arc wasn't meant to hear, and Civilian Arc likes to ask this to any guests we have on the podcast. And funny enough, you like half of the question involves Cobalt that you happen to be on. He usually asks this: who would win in a fight? But wait a sec, no, Cobalt's not even involved in this situation fully.
No.
He normally asks who would win in this kind of fight. Either Ghost Raptor immediately after it fought Cobalt, like hadn't even started repairing the robot yet, or Grabot.
There is a distinct chance that Grabot simply turns off.
True. You can't count it out, man. You never know.
I think all the lipo smoke from Ghost Raptor might give it just enough controlled movement for Grabot to shut off.
What's so funny is that's exactly what Ricky said when he was on here a couple weeks ago. Oh, that yeah, but it always surprises me how apparently the Captain Shredder repair job was bigger for Ghost Raptor than it was after fighting Cobalt, at least. But I believe it with how Chuck explained it and everything.
Yeah,
Darren,
because
oh,
for that fight, like, yeah, we had done a lot of damage, but the main thing we had actually hit was there's this like I think half-inch tie rear frame rail in Ghost Raptor, and we just sailed clean through it. So it, like separated into pieces. Obviously the batteries were done, but most of those pieces were still usable. Like all the motors, so on, like the different pods, they just had to essentially redo all the wiring and replace like the frame rail and the back of the pod and so on. It was a pretty incredible hit.
oh yeah, it's awesome regardless. Darren, you have your usual question you like to ask builders?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll ask it. Uh, I think you've only been in like 4 fights, but maybe you've been in for longer. I don't know. So, if you could go back and redo one of your matches, what fight would you pick, and what would you do differently?
And for myself, it'd just be the Bloodsport match and just put more screws in the battery box. 'Cause I think that was like incredibly winnable. You know, because like one hit literally flipped them over. Also,
Yeah, I think
yeah, for something I forgot to note for that fight. I didn't know that they couldn't self-right. And from the
yeah.
position of the driver's box, if you look at the way it's oriented, all I could see was the bottom of the robot and all their donors. So I'm sitting here looking at like a friggin' Patreon list, and the robot's turning something. Oh, they're self-righting. But if you look at the footage, the mast reaches the very top of its travel and stops because they can't self-right.
Uh,
Yeah, Bloodsport even commented on social media how they weren't able to find out whether they could self-right because you ended up hitting them and right as they were trying to. And
No, you can see like it. You can see it rotate and then just stop for like a half second before I strike them again.
yeah, but yeah, that's awesome regardless. Yeah, it's a good answer too. Yeah, and might as well ask this one right before we get here, because I don't think it makes sense to ask this later. I know you and Bunny have been probably the two people I know of that have been most expressive on the upper deck. What are your takes on it? And I know you've talked a little bit about it so far today.
So like, I think it's just actively making BattleBots worse in many respects. So there's the obvious thing of like, horizontals hate it because it just is like a bunch of corners and like a bunch of corners that stick out, and then like the death corners, if you just simply die. Like that's the obvious part. Another thing is like when it comes to the way it's oriented, it essentially removes an entire direction to dodge because it's parallel to the driver's box, right? Your depth perception going like straight here to here is a lot worse than it is like obviously side on. So they're eating away at that space. So now not only is there less room to dodge, people are just not going to do it because your depth perception is so much worse. It's so much riskier. Another thing is it gives like a huge boost to wide robots because now with so much of the shelf being removed, it's so hard to flank around a wide robot, especially if they're perpendicular to the shelf for the whole depth perception reasons I was talking about.
Gotcha.
Second, I think the drivetrains have gotten a lot faster since season 5, but I don't think anyone's been able to really see that unless like for a few exceptions like Claw Viper, just because there is just so much less room to move.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, so I think a lot of that's a lot of the concerns Bunny's expressed, at least about the upper deck. And she's also got a horizontal spinner robots and
Yeah, and like with the whole wider robot thing, because as I said, you're essentially fighting in an alley now instead of a square. Like if you don't like the fork game and you want people to maneuver, you got to give them room to maneuver. Like Claw Viper's doing great and all, but it had to do a lot of like crazy stuff to get where it was, and even then, it still has to go head on and still like lost.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Because yeah, at least with my stance on the upper deck, I'm personally with you. Like I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the upper deck. Like I just don't think it's worked as well as what like BattleBots was intending it to go for. Because like I think its main purpose is at least more for flipper robots, just because of losing the out of the arena zones like that, and that could give the flipper bots another opportunity. Plus, it might also be awesome to see a robot get flung up there. But I think it's just given birds like another big advantage, and horizontal spinners a big disadvantage, as we saw like right in the first episode of it being enacted with Uppercut and Gigabyte. And
yeah, so a few things about that is, like people have been thrown on there before, and there just isn't really much fanfare because it's like, oh, they're on the shelf now. Second, like the out of the arena zones aren't off limits. Like, yeah, they're at the higher like doors by the ring outs now, but any decent flipper can punt somebody like 4 feet up. Like they added those, so so it's like a burning. It's basically, so it's just less likely for a vertical spinner to punt them out because you're not having to deal with that kick play, which is, I don't know, like 2 feet off the ground. It's not like another 4 feet or something for the doors.
yeah, absolutely. Derin or Mantine, you two kind of want to get involved in the discussion on that. Want to share your stance on it?
The shelf, I think, was just really poorly implemented and just really poorly thought out. If you're gonna have some sort of thing in the arena, maybe make it a lot smaller, maybe shove it into a corner. At least then just it doesn't create any weird box things. Um, and if you're trying to make it harder for verts with or people trying to ground game it up with forks and all that, um, I don't know. There's probably a solution out there that someone a lot more smarter than me can think of, because I can't really think of anything that would work that wouldn't put down someone else by accident. Um, yeah, I think if you really, really, I mean, it would probably be easier just to remove the shelf and maybe put in some sort of I don't know. I think just removing it for now and going back to how the arena was in like season, what was it like 5? I
Yeah, it
think
was last year.
season 5. I think had it was the good was probably like the good best arena. Yeah, it had those Uda zones, but if you kind of want to make it harder but not impossible, maybe have like a designated Uda zone, uh, like kind of like Robot Wars did with that weird gate thing. But again, that arena design was completely different. So,
A proposal I heard, which was good, was like at 2 minutes. You know how they have, I call them like the pinball bumpers on the sides?
Mhm.
Imagine a really, like this is an open arena, but imagine like a really big one that swings out and essentially makes one corner a ring out zone, but only at like
Ah.
2 minutes or something.
I like that idea a lot. Like,
That'd be
Because like you don't
interesting.
want to hit because that's just crap. You don't want like the super low Robot Wars ring outs because those are like unbelievably easy. That and any vert can punt them out there. But having one that deploys after like 2 minutes or something, I think would be a good compromise.
I
Yeah.
love that idea because it
Yeah.
means fights don't just end instantly.
Yeah.
They're like a
Yeah,
flicker.
like because
But
you have to wait 2 minutes, and up until that 2 minutes, it's just an open box. Like you can go ham.
Absolutely. Plus, I miss the Uda zones personally because like lots of my favorite knockouts involved out of the arenas. Like to name a few, like Broncos KO of Stinger, uppercuts KO of Hijinks. Like some of those out of the arenas were so awesome to watch. But yeah, I would absolutely support that idea that you mentioned, Derek. I think that'd be awesome to see. And yeah, Mantine, you got anything you want to talk about with this discussion?
Well, I was gonna jokingly suggest they should add a pit, but then we already called that a shit idea, so I can't do that now. But the shelf is it has provided some interesting moments. It's had its cool, like it's had its cool usage, and people have made good use of it occasionally. But its initial intended like purpose of existing was to make it easier for control bots and flippers to do things. And funnily enough, it's only made it easier for verts to just kick things onto places that they can't get off of because they've been damaged by said kick that got them up there. And I feel like it nerfs horizontals way too much. It doesn't do enough for control bots like it was initially intended to do, and it's just something else that verts can use in an already very vert-sided competition. So they should. I wouldn't mind it being gone, personally. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of it in the world, but it's not terrible. It's just not great.
Yeah, that's fair. Anything else on this discussion, or should we move on to Minotaur and Fusion? Let's do
Move on.
Minotaur and Fusion. Minotaur and Fusion. Obviously, Minotaur is my favorite robot and the one I'm chose to win it all. But very nervous about this one because my big question about this matchup was going to be which Fusion were we going to see? Because we could get the Fusion that kicked emulsifiers, but and had Witch Doctor on the ropes, or the one that got KO'd quickly by Huge and had another fire after Rotator. But yeah, this fight a lot quicker than I was expecting to see, including we get a very good discussion from the Waiachi crew with their live stream yesterday on what happened with Fusion in this one and why they ended up dying pretty quickly into it. But anyway, then y'all want to share your thoughts on the match?
Eric, you
Yeah,
can go.
I saw the matchup and I was strongly leaning towards Minotaur winning. I also knew there were a few unknowns with Fusion, like besides whether or not it would work. A few things being A, Minotaur actually doesn't have that much reach, so Fusion's horizontal could actually do something to them. And B, I knew Fusion actually spins a bit faster than Minotaur, so there's actually a chance they would win the weapon to weapons. I didn't expect that upside down weapon to weapon, because that just essentially ended Fusion. Yeah, because a lot of people don't realize when there's like an upside down weapon to weapon like that, there's just an immense amount of energy because your different spinner tips are essentially coming in at like 400 miles an hour or something
Yeah.
like that. So there's a huge amount of energy, especially with the robot that's spinning regularly, because they're braced by the ground, which means on that huge hit, they just take a huge amount of energy while the other robot just gets flown.
Absolutely. Darren, you want to talk about the fight or Mantine?
This fight went exactly as I expected, except it kind of almost didn't. Fusion did actually win a weapon on weapon engagement, which was surprising until you set out the weapon speed thing. So, okay. And then Fusion caught fire like it normally does, and they're out. So yeah, quick, easy win for Minotaur. Honestly, didn't really break much of a sweat. So, yay.
I was very similar to Green coming into this. It very much depended on what fusion we saw in this fight. I mean, it could have been the fusion that we saw nearly beat Witch Doctor and or kick a Mulsifier around. But we did not see that fusion, and I knew if it wasn't Fusion's best, there was no way in hell it was going to win. And indeed, we did not see Fusion's best that day. So unfortunately for them, they're out. Minotaur with pretty expected win, and I think a pretty solid path until they meet Saw Blaze. I presume.
Saw Blaze or
anyway.
Monsoon.
Or Monsoon. No,
We'll talk about that matchup a little bit
yeah.
later.
Well, either one of them. That fight could go either way, so I
Oh,
probably
yeah.
shouldn't presume so much. But yeah, I mean it's hopefully they get Fusion, because I mean Fusion has proven it is very much so capable of being a competitor when it so chooses to be. It's just, when is it going to choose to be? Because you never know. It kind of depends on the day. And yeah, Minotaur with a pretty solid quick win there, and Fusion just got to get those stuff figured out, man.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, Waiachi had their live stream recently, and they did a very good, very in-depth explanation of what was going on with Fusion on this one. Yeah, they had an absolutely fried speed controller, at least, that they were showing off in that thing. And likely was because of that second weapon-on-weapon shot that Derek was talking about. Reese even admitted that he actually didn't know that Minotaur was inverted for that one and wished he went in with the horizontal spinner instead, just because probably also that it would have a lot more reach and that it could probably take some major chunks on a Minotaur's frame at least. But was well driven by Daniel to be able to get the victory and avoid Fusion from connecting on lots of those exposed sides on Minotaur, and the 1 seed prevails, and we're moving on to the next round. And where it's got another interesting opponent, and I'm really looking forward to that matchup, and we'll get to it at some point. Yeah, anything else really on this one, or should we move on to the other Waiachi battle? Other Waiachi battle. All right, this one. So then got a battle between another top seed and Hydra and that powerful old hydraulics flipper taking on the Australian robot Death Roll and their vertical spinner. This one was going to be an interesting one just because, like, on one side we got Hydra that really depends on winning the ground game, and then we got Death Roll. It doesn't really go for ground game; they go more for reach. So thought this would be a pretty difficult opponent for Hydra, at least. He's like, just on the fact that their Death Roll's vertical spinner can still at least slightly connect with Hydra, even if it gets tossed in the air like that. And not to mention, this fight ended up making history because it is now confirmed that Death Roll managed to hit the ceiling of the battle box. So first time for that. So y'all want to talk about this match?
Yeah, so I honestly, it was just like, I thought Hydra would dominate, and I knew they would dominate, because if Death Roll is not hitting the front of Cobalt in our match, and it's steeper, they're never touching Hydra. And it was only like a driving mistake, which led to them like hitting the side of Hydra, but that it's literally just a pocket full of air there, if you've seen how the robot's structured. Another factor coming into the fight is if you just sacrifice all ground game, then your opponent can run a really mediocre ground game that doesn't get caught in the floor. Because if you see, Hydra's just running those like hinged welded wedges. Like those they wouldn't get under any good opponent, but it doesn't matter because Deathrol's running nothing. So you're essentially just giving them free mobility if you run nothing. And yeah, when is expected? I didn't expect the flips to be so high, but my reasoning for that is because Deathrol is such like a short, compact robot that Hydra is essentially able to get the tip of that spinner right under the center of gravity, especially because Deathrol's coming in head on. The center of gravity is going to be forward biased due to the spinner. So it's able to get right under that center of gravity and shoot them straight up. Obviously, like they mentioned, the gyro helps, and it does, but I also think that center of gravity thing mattered a lot. That unstick took way longer in person than it took on the show, but they just did whatever unstick, and then they were just kind of limping for the last bit of the match. But yeah, it turned out like mostly exactly what I expected. Like barring a massive driving mistake, I thought Hydra was going to take it.
Derin or Mantine?
Yeah, this fight went about as I expected. It was just a quick and easy, pretty easy win for Hydra, flipping that roll really high, which was impressive to watch. Yeah, it really not much to say. It was just kind of one-sided for the most part, and then they had a couple drive issues near the end, and that was kind of it.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, this is how I foresaw this fight going as well. I was hoping that maybe Death Roll could pull something out, and frankly, they almost did, but they just couldn't get any purchase on Hydra, and couldn't really fling them around like they have previous opponents. And I'm hoping that Death Roll does come back with some changes, because it does need to. You either need to make the weapon a little lower so it can actually, there's not just that big space in front of it where it doesn't actually hit anything, because wedgeless need to have the weapon leading, and Death Roll almost kind of doesn't have the weapon really leading far enough in front to actually connect with anything and be a real good wedge expert. Or they need to just cave and actually go for the wedge game, and I'm interested to see which one of them they'll do, because I can only assume they'll go for one of those options.
You can't just like stick the spinner just lower and farther, especially like a single disc vert like that, and actually do anything. Because if you're like really, really close to the ground, when you hit somebody, you're probably going to immediately strike the floor, and that's incredibly bad.
Yeah.
Second, because it's such a narrow disc, there's honestly a chance that you hit somebody's wedgelets, but if you're not running anything and Hydra's wanting basically like a wedge like that, you just don't do anything. Because geometrically, you're almost hitting straight down on an opponent. And that's not going to do anything to a sturdy enough setup.
That's fair. So yeah, this fight pretty much went how I expected it to. I was expecting we were going to see a flip fest from Hydra, and that's sure enough what we got. And also was not really expecting Death Roll to go flying so high up to where it actually hit the ceiling, but that's sure what we got. Including the Waiachi clan mentioned they didn't initially know that Death Roll hit the ceiling just because they were so focused on Death Roll not landing and hitting Hydra, which actually did happen, because apparently before the unstick, Death Roll did get a small hit on the top near the backside, near one of the rear wheels, that didn't quite lock it up. But apparently the loss of the damage that we saw Death Roll and Hydra take in this match came from that unstick right there, and what's apparently caused most of the problems that either robot were having right there. And yeah, so not to mention also that the viewer clan pointed out that Death Roll was actually stuck at the end of that match when they were trying to self-right. But it was a great fight overall, good effort by Death Roll. Hopefully we'll get to see Death Roll in Champions or whatever else. Hopefully we'll just get to see Death Roll in general once again. So yeah, anything else? Should we move on to the next match?
Well,
next match. All right, this one. And Mantine, should I just leave the floor to you?
I don't really have much to say. I was kind of just disappointed that I'm not sure why, because I remember seeing on the Instagram, Quantum's Instagram, that they only went for like a low pressure bite on the back of Ribot. And I do question that sort of. I mean, I get that they were stuck, and that's, I guess that does somewhat answer that. But the next question, my more important one, is I do wonder why they didn't line up behind them in a case where if Ribot did escape, they could just bite them again. I feel like that was a bit of a critical error there, because I mean they just let Ribot go essentially. And I mean, I know it seemed like they were stuck, but you'd think, especially in the, this is the tournament, I mean, you've got to really plan for these things a little better. And it was a disappointing loss. I hate to see one of the more pretty and just generally diverse robots go out to one of the admittedly more cookie cutter 4-wheel drive verts that people aren't a huge fan of these days. But hopefully we'll see Quantum back next year. It'd be a real shame to lose Quantum. That's one of the only real crushers that well, actually it is the only real crusher we see these days, and it is a beautiful piece of engineering. And I hate to not see it come back next year. It's probably one of my favorites for sure.
So my thinking with this match was I knew Ribot would win the ground game. Because Quantum hadn't seriously been challenged in the ground game department before, and I knew their forks would get under. I didn't expect them to get stuck. Personally, yeah, I would have parked behind them, and I wouldn't have bothered with the bite. Because, like, sure, make it television. But also, it's the tournament. If something like that happens, just let it happen. Don't interfere with it. Don't poke at it at all. And then once Ribot got free, it kind of went how I expected. Like that, but that initial opening was a bit of a shocker for me.
Absolutely. Derin, you got a summary of this match?
Yeah, this was a. I had Quantum winning because I assumed that they'd do something. I don't know, but yeah, this was a pretty sad affair for Quantum losing out after going 4-0 in the qualifiers. Hopefully they'll be back next year or in champions. Yeah, good fight, I suppose. Pretty quick and easy. Also, good demonstration. Even with how hyped the Ribot team were, they did still give Quantum a chance to tell them about that they would attack them if they moved. So that was good communication. And yeah, Quantum looked rough after this fight ended.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also disappointed to see Quantum go out this early after such an awesome qualifying round for Quantum, but I did kind of expect this because I did have Ribot advancing after this fight, because I was fully expecting Ribot to go with the vertical spinner and wedgelets for this one to challenge Quantum at the ground game, where Ribot would probably win that. And sure enough, that's what happened. I do think that was a bit of a critical error on Quantum. Like, while I do agree about them like backing off, looking to take the win, exactly, just the fact that they didn't hang out right behind Ribot, like what some of the others here have been saying, was a bit of an error on their part. But yeah, and then once Ribot got freed, it once again, as the others said, it went pretty much how I expected it would, and Ribot got a quick KO. And yeah, fortunately, it sounded like that bite was actually very near the drive area of Ribot and possibly could have disabled them, but lucky enough for Ribot, it just missed, and we'll see Ribot advancing. But this fight, as well as the Scorpios one, has definitely proven, at least to me, that Ribot is one that you don't want to underestimate for sure. Because like even though it might have gotten bodied a bit in their first couple matchups, these last two matchups have been significant for Ribot and been showing that this frog is absolutely still in it this year. And we'll see how they carry that on to their next match with Black Dragon. But we'll probably talk about that. We'll talk about that later. So, any other thoughts, or should we move on to the next one? Next one.
Next.
All right, next one. Battle between another one of my favorite robots. We got Malice and Switchback, the 16, the 17 seed. This one, so I kind of expected configuration wise went pretty much how I expected it to. Expecting Switchback would probably go with that wedge for this one, and then Malice would probably go with forks and the drumstick for this one, and that's pretty much exactly what we got. And I figured whoever won this matchup was gonna be the one, but it's gonna be the last one to lose the weapon breakdown, because I feel like somebody's weapon was probably gonna break this match, and that's why I went with Malice for this one, because I had more confidence in Malice accomplishing that, and that's pretty much what happened in this one. And it was a rock solid fight. Y'all want to talk about this matchup then?
So like I know the Mouse team pretty well. They're like kind of localish to me. And you know, we've been investigating like robo games and so on. So I knew that this version of Malice had bearing issues, but I also knew that Switchback's weapon, while like impressive on paper, had kind of a number of fatal flaws, which I felt like would have kicked in, and I think they did, which was their like egg beater thing is too thin. Like I've seen it, it's just too thin. B, the running tooth belt on weapon, which you can get away with on like a 12-pounder, you can't get away with it at 250s. Like it's why the weapon died against Banshee, because either with a tooth belt, there's no slip. So either your belts explode on a hit, or your motor goes to near zero and something bad happens on a hit. So it's not supposed to do that, and speed controls don't like it if you do that. I don't. Yeah, I expected their configurations. I don't exactly know why Switchback initially ran with the arm slightly high. Like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you're trying to make the forks less of a factor, but you're still not changing the factor of the forks are there, they're going to get under you. And because it's not flat in the ground, they're not getting braced by the ground if Malice does strike the wedge. They're just putting a huge amount of stress on all their other weapon systems. I don't think the comments about like, oh, you know, why is Malice's weapon so weak, or at least motor-wise or something, was valid. I just think they were being very careful about it due to their bearings. And this is the first year they're running our speed controller. But yeah, it's went as I expected. I thought Malice would win as they had a better weapon. It did so. I did expect Switchback to get knocked out. Credit to them for staying alive, but it was pretty knackered by the end of it.
Absolutely. Derin or Mantine?
I had Switchback winning, but honestly, I kind of this fight was really a lot of a coin toss. I think I went with Switchback because their wins were slightly more impressive, I think. They had the pretty soft win against the Banshee. Lost to Death Rule. Beat
Ominous,
beat Ominous.
and then Hijinks.
And then beat Hijinks in a pretty insane manner. Malice has lost to Lockjaw. Beat Emulsifier. What's their for? Then they beat who else did they
Valkyrie.
fight?
Valkyrie
Yeah.
and Gruff.
Yeah. So I think I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what I expected. I kind of either way I expected no matter who won, they're losing the Minotaur. So honestly, I just went with I'm gonna set coin switch back after a lot of deliberation because why not? Yeah, this fight went pretty. It was kind of slow near the end. It was pretty good beginning. Then Switchback kind of just died. Then Malice didn't really do more damage to it. Then Malice ran into the kill saws, which was kind of funny.
Oh, that was funny. The weapon on weapon between the drumstick and the kill saws.
Yeah.
I don't know why those kill saws were firing at all during that match. They normally shut them off for horizontals. Because like if you fire that into like a big horizontal, I don't care how beefy you say those kill saws are. I think they're just dying.
Well, Malice is the villain of Battlebots, so maybe villain of Battlebots, so tear up the battle box, maybe tear up the kill saws or something, but it was still a funny thing to see.
Yeah. So yeah, then Switchback's drive kind of really started crapping out throughout the entire fight for some reason. And then Malice got the decision. So yeah.
Mantine, you got any thoughts on this match?
That's about what I expected to happen in this one. Malice did a pretty solid job of just it showed it was a little more reliable in this fight. Malice has definitely gotten better over the past few seasons. It's showed a lot of improvement, and I don't think they'll go much further than this, just due to the nature of who they're fighting. But that Malice between this season and especially Robo Games has shown that it's definitely becoming more and more of a strong competitor, and I'm excited to see how they'll continue in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this fight was summed up pretty well. Nice to see Malice able to do that much damage, even if their weapon's spinning up at like a slower rate, like what for the weapon gear issues, like what Derek was bringing up earlier. It was nice to see Malice's weapon spinning for the full 3 minutes, and then doing quite a bit of damage to Switchback despite it. Credit to Switchback for surviving the full 3 minutes there and continuing to take impact after impact, and had a few got solid control moments when those two had a little tussle in the short corner at least, and definitely showing that Switchback absolutely an improved robot from last season, and hopefully we get to see Switchback in the future once again. So Malice definitely is a tough opponent coming for them in Minotaur in their next matchup, which makes me sad a little bit because those are two of my favorite robots out there, and they're about to meet in the battle box next Thursday. But that should be an awesome fight. We'll talk a little bit more about that one near the end of the podcast. So should we move on to the next matchup then, unless you all have anything else left to talk about? Next match. This one I have a feeling made quite a few people sad at least. We got battle between two great drivers in Mag Vasquez and Sean Reed with this one. Whiplash and Beta. Whiplash went with about the config a lot of us were expecting to see, and then Beta went with the boat armor for this one. And quick fight, definitely a lot quicker of a fight than what I was expecting to see, but the outcome was about what I was expecting. So y'all want to talk about this matchup here?
Do we dare discuss what happened the second? I think was the second. Actually, no, never mind. We're bringing it up later. Never mind. This fight, honestly, I'm impressed that I don't think Whiplash's vertical spinner ever really got a bite on Beta at all. I don't think. I think they just got lifted a lot. Right? Am I right there?
Yeah, they didn't really get a good bite.
Yeah.
It was more so just a lifter.
And they got a good couple hits, and then Whiplash just lifted him up onto the deck, and then it just died for some reason. I'm not sure if they were high centered or not. I couldn't tell. Or if it just straight up just died. So quick fight, but
the Waiachi crew, when they were talking about it yesterday, they think it might have been a magnets issue on Beta, at least for what possibly hindered them from being able to move when they were up on the upper deck like that. But I'm not fully certain. I haven't seen a damage report, but
I mean, matchup went as I expected of. If you just sacrifice all possibilities of ground game, then your opponent needs to run like one fork and you die. And they can have free reign on driving. So yeah. It was pretty straightforward, a bit faster than I expected, but oh well.
Yeah. I know a lot of people that were a bit critical about Beta using the bow armor for this one. In my opinion, I thought that was the right choice for Beta to use for this fight, because I think they would probably lose this match either way, whether they went with the wedge or the bow. It's just I think the bow provides them like a lot more reach of an opportunity to use the hammer, because I don't think Beta would get any hammer shots in if they use the regular wedge config. But yeah, I think their best shot winning this match would be use the hammer to knock something up, disconnect something from Whiplash or disable the spinner or the lifter or whatever, which I think is probably what they were trying to go for this one, but obviously didn't quite happen exactly. But regardless, this fight did go how I expected it to. I thought we were going to see Whiplash win the control battle and get a KO or something on Vita. So I don't think there's really much more to talk about this one. So should we move on to last one? I believe it is last one. Okay, this one. So the episode ended with with technically a rematch between drivers, at least Blip and Sawblaze. So these two met a couple seasons ago, but Aaron Hill was driving Tantrum instead, and we saw Tantrum continue Tantrum's dark horse run, and this time we got Sawblaze taking on Blip. So it'll be interesting to see how Sawblaze rebounded after they were coming off of a loss to another Flipper and Hydra, and yeah, we got a lot of promise here. So Blip got interesting fork set up for this one, as well as a bunch of top armor to protect itself from Sawblaze's hammer saw. Sawblaze talked about how they had a set of wheels ready that should give them a bit more traction and should help them a bit more in a fight like this. So enough from me. You three want to talk about the match?
Yeah,
Alright.
so the wheels thing, like, people have found like those solid rubber wheels, if you have a lot of dry power, a lot of magnet, they'll actually wear quite quickly. The fix of casting over it was a pretty creative one, and I think we'll see more teams actually do it during the off season to either extend the life of their tires, or just make them better. Because from what I've heard, at least, it was more durable than the traditional, like, just straight raw rubber. For the matchup, Blip's actually running a sheet of Tegris they bought off of us, which was pretty funny. I thought the Tegris top armor worked mostly fairly well, but I didn't expect their ground game choice to be what it was. Like the middle kind of like improvised piano key and then the dual forks. I think just going with the piano keys they had run at the beginning of the season was a better bet. They didn't really get the chance to flyer their flipper because they gyro, and this is not a time you want to gyro because that kind of cost them the end game fight. Just having that spinner revved and them gyroing when they turn. So I think they did their best. It's a really durable robot, but yeah, I do think if they had run the piano keys, they would have had a more significant shot, because Sawblaze is always just going to outreach you unless you've got something pretty nutty.
Absolutely. Derin or Mantine?
Yeah, this is a pretty quick and easy. Well, not quick. I mean, this is a pretty easy fight for Sawblaze. They were constantly on point. Whatever fix they did for those wheels, which they done, worked very well, and they controlled Blip around, just kept smashing with the hammer saw, and I think one of the first hits disabled the solenoid and Blip's flipper, so they couldn't actually fire the thing. So that helped matters. And yeah, Blip was pretty durable, but in the end, they just lost out on the judge decision. So Sawblaze continues onwards.
Yeah. I was hoping Blip would win this fight, but I kind of knew in my heart it wouldn't. Sawblaze has been very, very dominant all season. It's done very well. It's always been a very good robot. Blip just never really got a chance, especially after one of those early hits disabled the flipper, and from there it was just kind of, could Blip live? And to its credit, it did, but not to much avail, as it was just kind of bullied by Sawblaze. So it's kind of how I saw this fight going, but I was hoping Blip would win, but it just couldn't pull it off.
Yeah. This one, another driving clinic by Jameson Go for this one. Thought he could not have driven this fight better than he did in this match. Did a great job of getting underneath Blip, and the times that Blip did get underneath Sawblaze, he was able to slip away before Blip fired the flipper, at least prior to the flipper breaking, because like Derin said, we saw a damage report from Sawblaze recently, and Sawblaze did disable the flipper, like Derin said, and in one of those 15 hammer saw strikes that Sawblaze landed, which is insane. And yeah, it just amazes me how well Blip was able to hold up to that thing, just showing how much of a brick that robot is. And I hope we'll get to see it once again later on in the season, or possibly or in the future. So we already know it seems Reasonable Robotics is hinting at that they have a cluster bot they're looking to bring for next season. Hopefully we'll get to see Blip once as well. So but yeah, we'll find out more details on that later on. So I don't think there's really much more to talk about. So let's talk about the next two topics that I got in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we'd talk about the after show thing. So everyone want to share thoughts on that?
Love it. Best decision they've made, I think, was to include this after show. Just chef's kiss, glorious thing. Don't have anything really more specific to say yet. It's just I'll leave it to these two.
Mantine, you got anything on that? Or Derek?
I mean, I thought the whole after show thing, I like it. The whole idea of like, bringing the captains back, explaining things, that's really cool. I think something they don't do often enough is show how big the robots are. A lot of people assume they're really small, but having people roll them up, stand next to them, stand next to like a huge wheel, stuff like that is stuff I think is really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was cool. I like that.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome as well, because like I've been saying this for a while, but I really like how Battlebots is getting the builders more involved in it this season. Like combination of getting them involved to commentate a couple fights, and then also for this too, because like while Chris, Kenny, and the Battlebots crew are definitely a lot more knowledgeable in the sport than they were years ago, like definitely getting lots of the builders involved, like gives us a more like in-depth experience. And it's always nice to get like that. It's always nice to get like somebody who's a lot more of an expert in the sport involved in lots of this. Getting to hear Anna talk about what happened with Ripperoni after the Black Dragon fight, as well as why they incorporate dry ice into this whole thing, was really cool to see. And same thing with the getting to hear about Mad Catter and Huge for next season, hearing what their strategies are, which I'm guessing by the sounds of it and by the order of this fight, I'm betting that's gonna be the main event for the next episode. Since they talked about this matchup, Blip and Sawblaze, between the two captains during the last after show, but I don't know whether that's gonna be the main event, but I'm looking forward to that one, especially what config is Mad Catter gonna have for that one. That should make it exciting. And then the last one being the memoriam they had for the 8 robots that lost. Reese Ewart's scene was comedy gold. Yeah. Derin, did you have anything else you want to talk about that? Or...
let's see. I would be remiss not to mention what was probably the highlight of the whole after show, which was the huge poon.
Yes. Yeah,
I can't wait for you guys to see it. It's really good.
Oh yeah. Oh, that makes me even even more hyped up for it. It makes me think something really good is coming involved in that fight. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And then the next topic I got before I move on to the last slide of this thing. Should we talk about the Shatter and Riptide scene in there? Because I know some of us have, I know myself especially, have expressed opinions about that one. And y'all want to share thoughts on that one?
So my statement on that whole stuff is I didn't expect the Riptide stuff to pop up in the next episode. Maybe it was a bit excessive, but about Riptide stuff in general is, yeah, some people are like, oh, BattleBots is playing a free reality TV. BattleBots will just not show anything unless you choose to make it like that. Like the question is worded favorably. There's a lot of stuff that happened, including like to us with Gigabyte, that they could have shown, which would have made things a lot more drama, which they didn't, because the production actually does know the villagers and care about them. You can choose how you are seen, and if you just don't choose to do something, they won't film it, they won't edit it, they won't display it. Simple as that.
Out of curiosity, though, what is your stance on the whole Riptide Shatter thing? I'm interested in hearing what builders' perspective from that. We've heard some builders talk about it in Huda, the Discord server, and then we heard the Riptide team's stance on it when they joined the Waiachi live stream from that week. But curious what your stance is on it.
I don't think Shatter cheated. Or sorry, Riptide cheated. I don't think Shatter cheated either, obviously. I do think that their behavior was unwarranted, and they can't. There's no excuses for it, especially if you understand what's going on there. Production is being more favorable to them than how they were acting, and Sid is saying, yes, production is technically very close to you when you are on the ramp, but they are all tented off. Like, they might as well not exist. It's functionally a different building where all the other production people are, and they're not monitoring you because they shouldn't have to. That's my statement on the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up where Derin and I are both at when we were discussing this in the last episode review. But I'll share my stance on that whole thing. Like, I thought that bring that scene in for this episode was pretty unnecessary. Like, I think they could have done a lot more with that couple minutes rather than that. Like, whether it's like show an interview, show an intro to a fight or something like that. I felt like any of those probably would have been better than that, because like I don't know why they want to bring up drama like that. Like, I get they might want to introduce like that Riptide Hypershock's happening next week, but is bring up like that drama and really villainizing the Shatter team necessary exactly? I personally don't think it is. Even if Battlebots is trying to go for like the drama type stuff, but yeah, that's kind of my stance on it. At least I didn't think it was needed, but I can't change that or anything. So, Derin or Mantine, either if you want to share your stance on it.
Yeah, it felt a little unnecessary to bring it up again in an episode where Riptide doesn't even appear. Like, it's a little excessive, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, it was excessive. I mean, they're really, I don't. They're talking about this way too much, and they know they're riling people up, and they're just, I don't know, they're perpetuating this way too much. They just need to let it rest. I'm tired of hearing people talk about it so fucking frequently.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at least, and so I like to move on from lots of that stuff because. All right, should we talk about the last thing? So, all right, we talked last podcast. We talked about the 4 matchups that were revealed from those eight matchups. We got these 4 matchups, the last 4 to be revealed that will happen in the next episode. So, figured we'd all share our stance on these 4 matchups and who we got for them. 3 of these being rematches from previous seasons. So, it should be interesting to see how lots of these robots rebound and change from the first time those robots fought, and it should be great to see. So I'll leave the floor to you 3.
So looking at the matches, Minotaur versus Mouse. So the way I see it is, Minotaur has issues with like very big horizontals because as a drum they don't have much reach and they don't have a wedge. But I also knew that Mouse was suffering from bearing issues. Weapon choice, I knew from Mouse would be a big one in this because maybe not going with something that isn't the bar actually might be the move, because the bar is more likely for Minotaur to get a big bite on them. Also, the last big horizontal that Minotaur fight was Bloodsport, and they had the sandwich, and that was like not really a good test. So while I did suspect that Minotaur may win, I do think Mouse could do some interesting things. Sawblade versus Monsoon to me is, I think Monsoon's a lot better than it was last time they fought. I also think Sawblaze has taken massive steps up. I do think Sawblaze's ground game actually can effectively outreach Monsoon. Because for most robots, it's hard to outreach Monsoon because of the pivoting pods thing, but I think Sawblaze had the reach for it. Hydra versus Whiplash, I think that's just a ground game question. Who do you believe in more for that? As both have been upping their ground game. In fact, Whiplash had a piano key setup this year, if you remember the Mad Catter fight. So remains to be seen what they pick for that. Robot versus Black Dragon. I think with a vert engagement like that, it's ground game dependent. I think while Black Dragon's weapon is less reliable, I think Ribot's less armored. So ground game, I think, is obviously a big factor. Armor and reliability may be another factor.
Absolutely. Derin or Mantine?
Minotaur Malice. I think we'll probably take it mostly because they're just more proven and have faced pretty big horizontals before with little issue. Sawblaze Monsoon, that's a pretty good rematch right there. Well, it depends, I think, on because the last time they fought, Sawblaze got its arm kinked in a way where they couldn't actually lower it. That's partially why they lost the fight, as well as being kind of crap. Now it's a lot less crap, so who knows? I think Sawblaze might be able to pull it off this time. Be interesting to see. Hydra Whiplash. I don't know. Probably Hydra because Whiplash has been fairly disappointing this year. Black Dragon. I don't know. Maybe we'll see a repeat of what happened that last time they fought, except maybe with less fire. I don't know. I'm just gonna say Black Dragon for the time being because consistency, and also Riplet hasn't exactly been doing that well this year.
Yeah.
So that's who I got.
Yeah, Minotaur should have a pretty easy time with Malice, all things considered. I definitely favor Sawblaze in the Monsoon Sawblaze fight. Sawblaze Monsoon is capable of doing it, but I just think that one shot from Sawblaze will very critically fuck something up. And Hydra Whiplash, yeah, it's very ground game dependent. I feel like it's going to go very similarly to where it did last time. I think Hydra may win in a more convincing manner. Hydra has, well, Whiplash has kind of struggled getting the disc working as well as I think they'd like it to, which may cause them some issues. So I feel like Hydra should have that one pretty handily. And if I had to pick at gunpoint, I'd probably say Black Dragon. Black Dragon has proved to be very resilient this year. Ribot has been kind of for most of the season. Sun did good in its last two fights, but those were both fights that I think it was pretty heavily favored in against two robots that aren't very good against verts to begin with. So I'd have to say Black Dragon there.
That's absolutely fair. Minotaur and Malice, sad that matchup's going down because two of my favorites, as I've said already. I'm expecting we're going to see Big Red's first appearance this season in this match because Bunny has mentioned in an Instagram group chat in that Malice simply uses the Big Red for drum spinners, and that's the case right here. And I think if they went with forks and the drumstick, I think they'd just play right into Minotaur's hands right there, like what happened at the beginning of Witch Doctor and Minotaur. I still have Minotaur winning this, but I wouldn't want to underestimate Malice in this one. But Sawblaze Monsoon, that could go either way, I think, because both robots have made some major improvements from when they last fought quite a few seasons ago. And I have Monsoon winning that one, but that's going to depend on like how many opportunities can Jameson Go get, because he's not going to want to fire that hammer saw right into Monsoon's weapon, because that hammer saw done for if they fire it right into the weapon of Monsoon, I feel. But yeah, that'll be a close one. I expect probably a good fight between those two robots. Hydra Whiplash, another control battle, basically. I'm gonna lean towards Hydra because I like Hydra's ground game abilities in this one, but like Derek said, it's gonna depend on who can outwedge the other. And control the fight better between the two of them. Robot Black Dragon, that's one I'm really looking forward to because I really liked their first showdown back in 2020 right there. But I expect another Vert on Vert battle for this one because I don't think Robot would go with the undercutter for a fight with Black Dragon. I think it's going to depend on who can win the ground game and reliability because I am going Black Dragon on this one, but one of my big questions is going to be their reliability for this fight because their weapon definitely has struggled in some of those matchups and but can't underestimate Black Dragon either in their ability to outlast opponents. But yeah, not to mention Robot's durability has been solid too, so that should be an awesome fight. It'll depend on ground game and driving for that fight. So, all right. Anything else really, or should we close out this podcast? Yeah. So that'll do it for this podcast. So thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe as usual. Check out Derin and Mantine's channels as well as social media info for Robotic Death Company that I'll link down below. Thank you to Derek for coming to this thing. It was great to have you on and hear lots of your insight about all these matchups, summary of Cobalt and Gigabyte season, and more. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always an honor to get to talk to lots of the builders on this thing. It's what makes it's what makes doing these podcasts so much fun to do. And yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.